Albert Einstein, science without religion is lame, religion without science is blind. He was agnostic, but the reason I chose him as the guy for the quote is because he got some of the crucial scientific information that we're going to talk about. So what I want to talk about tonight is one of the primary arguments, my favorite one, probably not the strongest for most people, arguments for the existence of God, so how we know God exists. And these arguments are using the highest levels of intellectualism. The truth is that the church, we have done a pretty poor job of preparing young people to go into college and to go into the real world and to face the attacks that you face in college and that you face in the real world from people that don't believe in God, that hate God. The one that stands out most for me in my mind is my freshman year in college. I was in Western Civilization, Part 2, and this little skinny guy, professor, stood up on the first day of class and said, God is not real, and then F God. And I was like, this is going to be a fun semester. But he spent the rest of the semester really laying it on pretty thick against Christianity. I didn't know anything. So I almost lost my faith in that semester because he was saying things I didn't know the answer to. I do now. I would give anything to go back and have the opportunity to be a student again in his class and talk to him some more. But I don't have that opportunity. But I think that for a lot of years I did, and the church as a whole is sending kids into a war zone unprepared for war. And so I have committed to teaching more of this type stuff to my youth, and hopefully not too late for you guys. Obviously not, because you're in a Bible study, so that's good. So, basics of how this stuff works. This is Austin, right? Premise. Here's how arguments set up. Okay, if you've had like classes on logic or philosophy, you've probably seen stuff like this. But here's how arguments set up. Premise number 1. First statement: Austin is a human or a man. Okay, arguably. Premise number 2: all men die. Okay, now the conclusion then follows logically from those two premises. So, right? So, premise 1: Austin's a man. Premise 2: all men die. Therefore, the natural conclusion that you come to is that Austin is going to die. So, that's pretty natural. That's the kind of arguments we're looking at. Here's premises, here's your conclusion that naturally and logically follows. Now, we can have arguments that don't logically follow. Like, it could say, Austin is a man and all pigs die. The conclusion Austin will die doesn't work, right? It doesn't logically follow. Or we can have conclusions like Austin is a man, all men have 4 legs, Austin has 4 legs. Right? The logic works there, but it's not true. Okay, so with these type of arguments, what you have to do if you don't want to believe that Austin is going to die is disprove one of those two premises, right? If you can disprove that Austin's a man, probably easier of the two, then you can disprove the conclusion that he's going to die. But if you can't disprove either one of those, then the conclusion must be true. So that's where we're working, that's where we're going. This argument is called the cosmological argument, because it's based on the cosmos, on the origin of things, on how everything began. And here it is. Premise number 1. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise number 2. The universe began to exist. All right? Everything that began to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Conclusion that naturally follows is that the universe has a cause. Okay, so if you want to disprove that, the universe has a cause, which you do if you don't want to believe in God, which we'll get to in a second. If you want to disprove that, all you got to do is disprove either premise 1 or premise number 2. One of those two things. If you can break down one of those, you get rid of the conclusion that the universe must exist and that universe has a cause, and that cause must be God, which is something outside of the universe. We'll get to that in a second. Okay, so you can argue premise 1 if you like. Everything that begins to exist has a cause, but the problem with that is that all of science is based on that premise. It's not the premise people want to go at generally. You know, but just by nature, that everything that you see that exists has a cause. For instance, if you walk outside and see a ball bouncing down the road, going down the road, what are you going to do? You're going to look where that ball came from. You don't just assume, hey, there's a ball bouncing. I guess it just started bouncing, and now it's bouncing. It's going to keep on bouncing. Doesn't make any sense. Or if I said, hey, Steph, I'm in a bad mood. I need a Snickers. You know what I mean? And I said, here's my keys. Go get me a Snickers from that gas station over there. And so Steph goes and gets me a Snickers. And in the meantime, we're studying and all that good stuff. And then I get a phone call from Steph, and Steph says, Renee, I got a problem. I said, okay, Steph, what's up? She said, well, you might should come down here. I said, okay. So we all load up in somebody else's little car, I guess, and we go over there to where Steph is over by gas station. And we see that Steph has T-boned a minivan. Right? Hit it hard. We get out and we say, Steph, what happened? She said, Renee, you're not going to believe this. You're not going to believe this. This van just popped out of nowhere. Like 1 second, it was not there. The next second, minivan, right there, just in the middle. And I just hit it. It just popped out of it, and it wasn't my fault. Come on, Steph. Nobody's going to say, oh, well, tough luck. This happens sometimes. Vans just pop out of nowhere. We know that every effect has a cause, right? That Steph's wreck's cause was her texting and driving, or her not paying attention, or her just being angry, this minivan guy, for flicking her off or something. So she hits this guy in the minivan, right? That's the cause. Every effect that we have in life and in all of nature has a cause. That one is not really arguable unless you're going to get rid of all science. Science is causes and effects. What science is. You look at the effects and determine the cause. You multiply causes and figure out what effects you're going to get. That's science. So if you want to get rid of all science and all knowledge, that's fine. But you don't want to do that, right? Scientists don't want to do that. Obviously, atheists don't want to do that. So premise 1 is not generally the one they go to. The one they go to is premise number 2, that the universe began to exist. I don't know if you knew this, but the Big Bang Theory it's what we believe. We're Big Bang theorists, Christians. We believe that there was this Big Bang where God said, let there be light, and everything came into existence, that everything began to exist in one moment, in a flash of light. That Big Bang caused everything. So, premise number 2, the universe began to exist. What I want to do for the remainder of our time is I want to give you 2 arguments. One's a scientific argument, and one's a philosophical argument for why premise 2 must be true. Okay? And if we can get to the conclusion, then we're proving that God exists, because whatever the cause must be outside of the said universe. Though we're not to the Christian God yet. Okay, scientific and a philosophical proof. Surge. You ever drink Surge back in the day? It's my secret weapon in Little League. Maybe it was before y'all's time. It was a green drink that they outlawed. They brought it back like last year, but it's not the same. It doesn't have the same caffeine volume. Surge, that's how you're going to remember this, okay? 5 points of evidence that point to the beginning of the universe, which, by the way, is by far, in the intellectual scientific community, everyone believes in the Big Bang now, or that the universe had a beginning, the universe is not eternal, to the point that a cosmologist, non-Christian cosmologist, said that not only is most of the evidence on the side of the Big Bang, but that all of the evidence is on the side of the Big Bang currently. But we'll look at this. I'll show it to you. Second law of thermodynamics. Anybody know what that says? Anybody? Physicist in here? It says that all energy is running out, basically. That if you have energy, then that energy is depleting. That we are on our way down from energy, right? That the universe is running out. We know at some point the universe is going to be depleted of energy. We will have no more. We will cease to exist. Now, scientifically, we're a long way from that. But we know it's happening. You don't gain more energy, you just run out of energy. So, if that's the case, which is the second law of thermodynamics, says that it is. If that's the case, that we're running out of energy, and we rewind that clock, what do you get to at some point? At some point, you get to full, right? Makes sense. So if there was an infinite amount of energy, which there would be in an infinite universe, then you'd never run out. But we're on our way to run out. At some point, we will run out. So if we are going to run out, which the second law of thermodynamics states that we are, then at some point, we must have been full. Otherwise, we wouldn't be running out. Okay, so it's a finite number of energy that we have. Therefore, that means that at some point, the energy began to deplete. That makes sense? Okay. So the only 2 options are you have infinite energy or you have a finite amount of energy. If the energy is running out, then the energy cannot be infinite. It must have been started at some point. So if it's depleting, then the universe must have begun, because at some point it must have been at the full. Simple enough? All right, the universe is expanding. Okay, these are scientific things accepted by every scientist, by all the scientific community. So we have that the second law of thermodynamics, that everything is running out of energy, and if we're running out, then at some point it must have been full. We cannot have an infinite supply. The universe is expanding like a balloon. From one single point, the universe is expanding outwards, and it still is. Same principle. If you take that clock and rewind it backwards, then at some point, what? You're going to get to that one point where it began. You can't go past the beginning. That doesn't make any sense. The balloon is expanding outwards. If you go back to the way it came, then at some point it started. Right? So since the universe is expanding, we can infer logically that the universe at some point began to expand. Had to have. Only way that logically makes sense. Okay. The R, radiation from the Big Bang. So, if you remember stories of World War II when the atomic bombs were dropped and radiation was like in the air for years. Okay, so they said, well, based on everything we know about radiation and about explosions, if the Big Bang was as big as it must have been, there must have been radiation still out there from that explosion, right? It didn't just dissipate. That radiation must still be there. So they looked for that for years. After they theorized that the Big Bang Theory was probably the most likely thing, they started looking for this radiation. But two dudes just stumbled upon it while they were looking for something else in the stars. They heard this radiation, this message, this kind of glowing in their massive sound device here from space, and discovered that this was indeed this radiation afterglow from this Big Bang. So from the initial explosion of the universe, there's still this radiation that exists in the universe from that explosion. It's still out there. They can still hear it. They can still see it. Okay, so that radiation from the explosion of the beginning of the universe still exists, discovered by these two guys named Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson. Robert Jastrow, who's an agnostic, means he doesn't know what he believes, astronomer, basically is what it means, says no other explanation than the Big Bang has been found for the fireball radiation. The clincher, which has convinced almost the last doubting Thomas, is that the radiation discovered by Penzias and Wilson has exactly the pattern of wavelengths expected for the light and head produced in a great explosion. Supporters of the eternal universe theory have tried desperately to find an alternative explanation, but they have failed. At the present time, the Big Bang Theory has no competitors. Okay, so not only was there radiation there, but it was exactly the consistency they thought it would be based on the explosion from the beginning. Okay, so we have that. Now, that's enough. We could have stopped after the S and that would be enough, but we're going to keep going. The G is great galaxy seeds, which is extremely complex. So we won't get into all of it. But basically, after they found this radiation afterglow, they said, okay, well, if that's true, then we should also see these things, which are basically the necessary physics required for galaxies to form. And they call these things great galaxy seeds. And a guy named George Smoot, maybe heard of him, he's a genius guy, says it's called these galaxy seeds, which they found the machining marks from the creation of the universe and the fingerprints of the maker. They said it was one of the biggest discoveries in the history of physics. They found these great galaxy seeds that was said to point to the universe beginning. Okay, and the last one is Einstein's theory of general relativity, which is also pretty complicated, but it basically says this. It says Einstein set out to prove actually the eternal state theory is what it's called. So he set out to prove the universe had always been here because he knew that a beginning would point to God, and he didn't want to believe in God. So he sets out on this journey with this general relativity study and research to prove that the universe has always been here, and what he ends up doing is proving the opposite. And in an interview he did in that time period, somebody asked him how he felt about his research, and all he said was, it's irritating. What he ended up discovering is that everything that we have in this universe, time, space, and matter, those are the three big words, time, space, and matter, must have all came into existence at the same point. That everything began, and not only did they begin, they all came together. Time began, space began, and matter began, all at the same moment. They all began together. Before then there was nothing, and then there was time, space, and matter. Okay, that all of it began at the same moment. So if that's the case, then we have something coming from nothing. Now when we think of nothing a lot of times, we think of like just kind of floating particles and just kind of some space, but that is something, right? There was nothing, no space for anything to be floating in, no time, no matter. It blows our minds, but that's what science says existed. Before the universe began, before time and space and matter came into existence, there was absolutely nothing. So they said things like, well maybe it was just lucky some particles ran together and some chemistry happened. No, there were no particles. There was no chemistry. There were no laws of physics. There was nothing, and then there was everything, including time, including space, including matter. So Einstein's theory of general relativity says all this came into existence indeed together and at one moment, and he calls this discovery quite irritating. One of my favorite quotes of all time. Jastrow says that there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. Not the quote I thought it was, but it's still a good one. He says that there are what I would call, or anyone would call, supernatural forces at work. That's things we can't explain. Non-science, above nature. Supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. So there are no competitors for this Big Bang Theory, for the beginning of the universe. Okay, now the philosophical one, which is fun for me. Philosophically, why the universe cannot be eternal, why it cannot be, have always been here, be infinite. This illustration is called Hilbert's Hotel. Hilbert's Hotel. Which goes like this. His point is that an actual infinity is not a real thing. Now, you can talk about infinity, and you can kind of have it in math and things, but it's not a real number. For instance, if I told Dalen to count to infinity, he could count. But after 1,000 years of counting, he'd be no closer then than he is right now, because he'd have infinity left in front of him, right? Infinity is an okay concept. Eternity is an okay concept, but it doesn't actually work in reality. And he uses this to kind of point that out. Okay, so if you have Hilbert's Hotel, which has an infinite number of rooms in it, okay, an infinite number of rooms. And Dalen walks up and says, hey, I need a room. The guy says, no problem. We're all full in our infinite number of rooms, but no problem. I'm just going to move everybody, the guy number 1 to number 2, the guy number 2 to number 3, the guy number 3 to number 4, the guy number 4 to number 5, and so on to infinity, and then Dalen can stay in room number 1. No problem. Which, of course, is absurd, but it gets more absurd when he adds this part to it. He says, okay, what if this bus comes, and on that bus is an infinite number of guests, and they walk into this infinite roomed hotel. All the rooms are full, and they say, hey, we need some rooms for an infinite number of people. And the guy says, no problem. He takes all the guys in room number 1, moves in room number 2, takes the guys in room number 3, moves in number 4, and all the odd number rooms, he moves those people to even number rooms, and now there's all these rooms open to infinity, and he can accommodate all of his guests. But after he's added all the guests, there's no more than there were than when they got there. There's still infinity, same number. And let's say if after they've got this full hotel of rooms, let's say half of them decide they want to leave. Let's say half of infinity, half of the guests decide they want to leave, so they walk out. After they walk out, there's the same exact number as before when they walked in. Before they walked out, same number, infinity. Now, here's the point, right? Yeah. Hurts a little. Here's the point. The point of this is that infinity is okay as an idea, as an abstract thing, but as an actuality, it doesn't work. You can't actually have an infinity of anything, including days, including the universe, which brings us to the next philosophical one, which I enjoy very much. It's like this. It's like if I said, okay, Dalen, here's how it's going to work. I'm going to give you dice for every day. You're going to start with today. You're going to put a dice down. You're going to go back to yesterday, and you're going to put a dice down. And for every day that you go back to in history, you're going to put a dice down, right?
A domino.
Domino. What did I say? Dice? All right, domino. You can put a domino down for each day. So you got domino for every day. Today you put one down. You go back to yesterday, you put one down. The day before that, you put one down. And for every day that's happened in all of history, you have a map. All of history, you put down one. And I say, okay, when you get to the beginning, when you get to the starting point, you can start those dominoes and you'll arrive at today, finally. We'll get to today. But the problem is that you never get to the point where you start. Right? You never get to the beginning point. Dalen never gets to the point where he can knock down the dominoes because he's always got another domino to add. There's always another one. There's always another one. There's always another one. So the point is that if there was an infinite number of days before this day, we would never actually reach today. That's a lot, I know. But if there was an infinite number of days before today, you would never actually get to today because there'd always be another day before today. There'd always be another day. There's always another domino to put there before you get to today. You can never begin the dominoes. So the point is you can't progress in infinity. There's always another thing in front of the day moving forward. You can't move forward in infinity. But here we are. We're at today. You could never get to today if there was an infinite number of days behind us. Does that make sense? If we look back in the past and there's an infinite number of days, then you never get to today. Because there's another day behind you, and another one to add on the end, another one to add on the end, another one to add on the end. Infinity is an okay idea and okay for abstract math, but it's not okay for practicality, for actual world, for our life. You can't have that. If there was an infinite number of days behind us, we never would have reached today. But we are here today. Today is the end of history, so there isn't an infinite number of days because we're here. Okay, so if you don't like the philosophical stuff, that's fine. Just let it go. Just focus on the science, because the science proves the same thing. I enjoy the philosophical stuff because it hurts me, and I'm an intellectual masochist. So, 2 reasons we know that the universe began to exist: scientific and philosophical. Scientifically, the entire scientific community now knows that the universe must have began. They're looking now for any other explanation because they know what that explanation means. But for right now, all the evidence points to the beginning of the universe. Philosophically, the same thing. We can't have any infinite anything and progress to today. We can't have any infinite anything and actually make sense. Infinity doesn't actually work. So here's the argument. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Conclusion, the universe has a cause. Now, here's where we get to that must be God. Okay, we said the universe began with time, space, and matter. That all those things came into existence at one point. Therefore, whatever that cause is, must be outside of those 3 things that were created at the beginning. Does that make sense? Because, okay, let's say time, space, and matter. You say, well, Renee, matter just created it. Yeah, but matter wasn't created until it started. So you'd have matter creating matter. It's called circular reasoning. It doesn't work. Matter can't create matter. It couldn't exist to create it. So what we have with this cause before the beginning, whatever cause this was, we now know there was a beginning. Something had to cause it. It's the premise of all science and premise one of the argument. Something had to cause it. This cause must be outside of time, outside of space, and outside of matter, because those three things came into existence with the beginning of the universe. So they couldn't have been any part of creating the universe. So whether you want to call it the Christian God or not, we're not even there yet. But it absolutely is some kind of God, because it must be outside of time, and outside of space, and outside of matter. All things that we use to measure anything in science. So here's what we have with this argument, the cosmological argument. Let me say this. The first objection by any layperson atheist is, well, if everything exists has a cause, then what's God's cause? Right? But that's actually not what it says. It says everything that begins to exist has a cause. And God didn't begin to exist. No matter if you're a Christian or not, there has to be a stopping point. There has to be something that has always been here. We've already determined that there must be a cause. If you want to get mad and not call it the Christian God, it's okay. But there must be something out there, outside of time, space, and matter, that decided for things to exist and decided to create. Some stopping point you have to get to. Now, if you want to go against the science and say that stopping point is matter or something, dirt, fine. But there has to be something. Something has always been eternal. I had one of the youth kids at my house the other night, and she was really struggling with this idea of God having always been here. And so I tried to get her to the point of realizing that that's not a Christian problem. That's an everybody problem. Everybody's got to deal with eternity. Something has always been here. Something's been here. Something has. It's not just a Christian problem. We just have a better answer than they do. Everyone's got a problem with eternity, with infinity in the past. Something has been here always. The question is, what explanation makes more sense? Does it make more sense to walk out to where Stephanie is and say, yeah, looks like that vein just popped out of nowhere? Does it make more sense to say, Stephanie, you hit that vein? Right, which one makes more sense? Which one explains the evidence better? You're looking for explanatory evidence. You can prove nothing beyond a shadow of a doubt. Nothing. For instance, we could all be in Austin's dream right now. Prove that we're not. You can't do it. We might be. Might be. Your whole life might have been a dream. You might wake up and be an 8-year-old. Oh, that'd be cool. Yeah. You can't prove anything beyond a shadow of a doubt. But you can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Like if we said premise 1, Austin is a man, premise 2, all men die, conclusion, Austin will die. Can I prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt? No. Maybe there's some guy in the jungles of South America with a fountain of youth who's just been living for 800 years. He's just never going to die. Maybe. Is that reasonable? No. Is it possible? I guess. But we can prove something beyond a reasonable doubt. And there is no doubt that there is beyond reasonable doubt to believe, just by this one thing we've talked about, that something caused it all to exist, and that something must have been outside of time, space, and matter, which would be very natural just to call God. So, first argument is the cosmological one. We're not going to do any more tonight, but we can do more later. What tends to be the most persuasive for a lot of people is the moral one, because you feel those things inside yourself. I like this one because I like the science and the philosophy and all that stuff, so I did it first because I'm selfish. But we can do the other ones next time we'll talk about that if you want. Questions on this stuff? Thoughts, comments, disagreements, debates, etc.
What was the atheists still think they were at through this?
They argue that the most common argument now is called multiple universe theory, which is the one they also use for the teleological argument, which is like fine-tuning, which says that the universe is precisely tuned for us, which it is. Also not scientifically debated. It is absurd. The odds. William Lane Craig says even half of the odds, like if you whatever the odds are, like if it was 1 in 100, you made it 1 in 50. If the half of the odds of us coming to existence were true, it would be like taking a dart and throwing it at the other side of the universe that we know, and hitting a 1-inch target. That'd be the odds of us coming to existence. So just absurd to the point of being null. And it's impossible that we get here by chance. So the way they get around that is, and around this, is this idea called multiple universe theory, which if you've been around anybody who's an atheist, you've probably heard it. That's all they got right now. It basically says that there's just like this machine out there pumping out universes, and there's an infinite number of universes, and at some point it had to get the right specificity for us to exist, and it just so happens that we're in that one. Now, is there evidence for that? None. No evidence. It's totally an assertion. There's not an argument at all. It's just a theory. They say, all right, here's the problem we got. Beginning of the universe looks a lot like God, and it looks like this universe has been really fine-tuned for these humans, for all of us to live here, which would seem to point to God, so we got to do something. And they say, well, how about this? There's an infinite number of universes, and we just got lucky and got in the one that produces life. Let's go with it. And that's where we are in the scientific community right now. There is no good answer for this evidence. There's no good answer for the teleological evidence. All they do for the moral evidence is say, well, there's no such thing as morality. That's what they have to end up doing. There is no good answer out there right now. And what's so sad is that what's being propagated throughout the whole country, especially, is that science and atheism is about reason and thinking, and Christianity is about belief and blind faith, which is just not true at all. In fact, all the evidence right now points to us, points to the beginning of the universe, which no atheist wants to believe in, but they're being suckered into it, so they have to find some way around it. What else? Questions? Doesn't have to be about that. It can be about anything. Yeah, we're still ahead of time. What's that?
If eternity doesn't work, what are we gonna do in heaven?
Well, it's a little different then because we're not in the time, space, and matter anymore. So it doesn't work inside time, space, and matter, which we're in. It has been created since the Big Bang. But once you get into heaven, then you're moving back into the realm of before creation. So our laws of physics don't apply anymore.
Brain hurts.
Or Tom.
Makes my brain
We'll
hurt.
We'll
don't know
never,
for sure, but
Yeah.
presumably.
we'll never exist in heaven because we won't reach today.
If there was an infinite past in our physical universe. The time thing and heaven thing, it's a little more difficult because the Bible seems to talk about us progressing in heaven, even like becoming smarter and working, and there has to be some sense in which time in which you can progress forward. So, but what else? Okay, so if you get asked by an atheist this week, hey, why do you even believe in God? You can say, well, let me give you one argument, and let me see what you say. And you can give them that one. 3 premises, and see what they say. And they won't know what to say because they've never heard it before. Probably they don't actually listen or read anything. And that's not true. Some of them really do. Some of them are great. Some of them are really seeking and are trying to find out knowledge. And they may talk with you about the premises and give absurd responses. But most of them just think that's what they're supposed to say if they want to sound smart. So they just say it, thinking that you won't have anything to say back. All right, I'm done.